Well, my name is Clinton Keith, and I'm currently the president of Clinton Keith Consulting. And what I do is just go around and help teams implement Scrum and Agile in general. One of the confusions is that people think that Scrum is a methodology, and it isn't. It's simply a framework for creating a methodology that's Agile. It's what's called a framework for a methodology, and the methodology that you build creates transparency. It's an Agile methodology, or allows you to build an Agile methodology, which allows you to build portions of your game at a time, see where the game is going, see what's fun about your game, and allow you to change the plan as you go along. It's not about not planning. It's about creating a plan based on what you know, identifying what you don't know, and then exploring what you don't know and building your plan with greater detail, rather than counting on a plan and counting on a schedule and letting the schedule determine what you ship. What we do in any Agile methodology is that we prioritize what we're making. So we're always working on the most important thing that'll create the greatest amount of fun next. And then if we have a ship date, like a Christmas ship date or a movie release that we're shipping simultaneously with, then we can get to that point and cut off our scope if we need to and ship the most important features that we know are fun, not that we've guessed are fun 18 months ahead of time. Well, there's really two phases of game development. Really, game development is two projects. You have pre-production, where you're finding the fun. You're exploring what your game is. And I use the example of you're making a platformer game. You're finding out whether jumping or flying and what's fun about jumping, what the height of jump is, things like that. But then when you enter production, you got to make 10 to 12 to 15 hours of entertainment based on this mechanic you've discovered in pre-production. And so we're making hundreds of ledges that depend on that jump height, and we don't want to iterate on that jump height. Well, all that stuff's locked down. Now we've moved from an iterative process to more of a incremental improvement assembly line process. It doesn't mean we have to stop looking for improvements. It doesn't mean we have to lock things into a schedule that's all predetermined, because schedules don't always anticipate all the problems. But Scrum is not a perfect match for that. Now, a lot of Agile thinking comes from assembly lines. A lot of Agile comes from Toyota, where they explore what the car is, and then they figure out how to mass produce that, and not only mass produce that, but always look for ways of continually improving how they make that car. Every person on that assembly line is empowered to stop the entire assembly line if they discover a problem. And that's why they've been able to dominate the global auto industry with better products at lower price. And so we take some of the cues from that and explore a different branch of Agile called lean production. I just released an article on gamasutra.com last week that explores changing Scrum in pre-production to lean during production. What lean does is it focuses on processes that are much more defined, that are much more clear-cut, that happen again and again with chains of things that have to occur, like an assembly line. But it looks at the waste that's built up in between. So, for example, we were able to find over 56% improvement in our production pipeline by just exploring how things were handed off. We saw that the concept artist was creating 12 pictures and drawing 12 pictures, and then handing that off across the building to the level designers who were building up that level based on that concept art. And that was a very time-consuming step to make 12 drawings. And so we looked at that we challenged the team to increase that pace, and they looked at that and they found that, well, if we had the concept artist sitting next to the level designers, having conversations on a day-to-day basis, we only had to produce like 3 drawings instead of 12. That chopped down that step by over 75%, and it increased quality because there was a conversation. They were doing, for example, a Paris level, and they were discussing whether to have the Arch de Triomphe or the Eiffel Tower and where to position those things. If the concept artist had just made the drawing of the arch, it would have been in the middle of the level. But the game designers felt that the gameplay wouldn't support a wide open area like that, and they were going to throw it away. So all that time that was spent on drawing the arch and creating all the views of the arch would have been wasted. A single conversation in 30 seconds or 60 seconds allowed them to abandon that idea and focus on different parts of Paris, creating a different type of Paris. So that's one of the Agile values of of encouraging conversation and collaboration over large pre-planned documents. One of the myths of Scrum is that it can solve problems for you. It can overcome poor teams or poor leadership, or just a lack of talent altogether, and it won't. You can take, say, my example is you can take 50 people off the street and say, hey, you're going to make a AAA game, and you don't have any experience in making games, but we're going to use Scrum. And the question I ask classes is, would this team be successful with Scrum? And most people say no. And my response is, well, actually, yes. They will fail fast. Scrum is an empirical system that shows the true progress of the team every iteration, every 2 weeks. You can't hide behind a plan and say, well, our first playable is off 18 months away during alpha. Then we'll optimize, then we'll polish, then you'll see the game. You can't hide behind that. You're delivering value every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, depending on your iteration length. So this team that's off the street, in 2 weeks, they're going to fail. They're going to fail badly, and it's going to be very visible. And the customer would quickly discover that. So it's a combination of, yeah, Scrum doesn't solve problems. It's not a silver bullet. Too many people in our industry think that Agile and Scrum is a silver bullet. And I would say there's probably about 50% of the attempts to adopt Scrum fail because of that. That they don't realize that this really does focus leadership on doing leadership. Takes management off the plate of a lot of leaders. You don't have to chase people around with Microsoft Project. You don't have to chase them around with clipboards saying how many hours have you done and why aren't you done now. Teams self-manage in that way, but it does emphasize that leadership, your senior programmer, your senior artist, should be mentoring, should be facilitating and teaching people how to do what they do well, why they were promoted to leads. And they're promoted to leads to do that and not to give up programming or give up creating art just so they can have Microsoft Project on their desk all day long, which is, to me, is a huge waste of talent. So, as I said up front, it really does focus and expose the issues you might have with talent, leadership, and teamwork. Scrum is, I compare it to your mother-in-law. Scrum will expose and highlight every shortcoming you have. And if you don't do anything about it, it's not going to do anything for you. When teams adopt Scrum, you just see this amazing flood of complaints and issues about their development process. Scrum doesn't have any practices. This is why I don't call it a methodology. Scrum does not have any practices about creating technology. It doesn't have any programming practices. It doesn't have any art practices, design practices. It has some teamwork practices to facilitate teams collaborating and collaborating with their customers and among themselves. It's a starting point for continuous improvement. Production is the most expensive part. We have outsourcing, which really inhibits our ability to iterate and incrementally improve things. And by looking at that and exploring different practices outside of Scrum and outside of even General Agile, you're always looking to improve productivity, and you always have metrics associated with it. And this is one of the things that I help companies establish, is that it's hard to tell whether you're improving or not, or whether you're just feeling better about something and not really improving, unless you have key metrics that show you things like, oh, how long does it take for your artist to iterate? How long does it take? What percentage of time during the day do you actually have a working build that people can grab and try out? Because those little things add up. Projects don't get a year late all at once. They lose an hour or two a day. And if you have metrics that measure that loss, and you try different things, you can see within days, did what we change improve things or not? If not, back off. If it have, like things like continuous integration, test-driven development, more in-depth asset testing, build servers, automated testers, things like that will show a slow increase over time that you can actually measure.